Welcome to CBSEasy.
So, what happens when different communities have to live together in one country? Well, today we're going to tackle that fundamental democratic question and dive into the high-stakes puzzle of sharing power.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a pretty common idea. This thought that sharing power just means dividing a country and ultimately making it weaker. It seems to make sense on the surface, but as we're about to see, the reality is way more complicated and, honestly, way more interesting.
To really get to the bottom of this, we're going to look at two totally different nations that, believe it or not, were facing the exact same core challenge: how to manage these deep cultural and linguistic divides.
So, say hello to our two case studies: Belgium, a small country right in the heart of Europe, and Sri Lanka, an island nation in South Asia. Both are pretty small countries, but they're home to incredibly diverse populations, which you can imagine is kind of the perfect recipe for potential conflict.
First up, let's look at Belgium. Now, its ethnic composition is, well, it's complicated. You've got a majority, about 59% of the population, who are Dutch speakers. Then there are the French speakers, making up about 40%. And then there's this tiny German-speaking minority, too.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and what makes this slide so important. In the capital city, Brussels, the whole thing gets flipped on its head. The national minority, the French speakers, are actually the huge majority in the city, making up 80% of the population there. You can just imagine the kind of unique and very tense power dynamic that created.
All right, now let's hop over to Sri Lanka. Here, the demographic picture is quite different. You have a much larger majority group, the Sinhala speakers, who make up a whopping 74% of the population. The biggest minority group, the Tamils, are about 18%. Okay, so you've got these two countries, both with really diverse populations, both simmering with the potential for some serious conflict. How did each of them decide to handle it? Well, this is where their stories just go in completely opposite directions.
On one hand, Sri Lanka went down a path called majoritarianism. On the other hand, Belgium took a radically different approach, what's known as the path of accommodation. So let's break down what these two paths actually looked like in the real world.
So, what exactly is majoritarianism? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's the belief that just because your community is the majority, you have the right to rule however you want, and you can pretty much just ignore the needs and wishes of any minority groups.
And in Sri Lanka, this wasn't just some abstract idea. It led to some really concrete actions. Right after independence, the new government made Sinhala the one and only official language. Then, they started rolling out policies that favored Sinhala speakers for university spots and for good government jobs. As you can guess, the Tamil minority felt more and more alienated, and by the 1980s, that tension just exploded.
And the outcome was absolutely catastrophic. That refusal to share power didn't make the country stronger, it tore it apart. We're talking decades of deep distrust, of alienation, and a brutal, tragic civil war that only ended in 2009 after an immense amount of suffering and loss of life.
Okay, now let's switch gears and look at Belgium's path of accommodation. Between 1970 and 1993, they actually amended their constitution 4 times to create this incredibly innovative system. They made it a rule that there had to be an equal number of Dutch and French-speaking ministers in the national government. They gave real, significant power to regional governments. And for that tricky situation in Brussels, they even created a special power-sharing government.
And this photo just says it all. It's a street sign in Brussels, and you can see the place names are written in both French and Dutch. It might seem like a small thing, but it's a huge, everyday symbol of their commitment to respecting each other and sharing their national identity. That's not just a sign, that's their whole policy in action.
So, the result in Belgium? It could not be more different from Sri Lanka's. By choosing to share power, they completely avoided a civil war, they kept their country united, and they created an environment so stable that Brussels eventually became the capital of the European Union. Talk about a different outcome.
The contrast is it's night and day, right? But why? Why is sharing power so often the better path? Well, it really comes down to 2 core sets of reasons.
You can basically put these reasons into 2 buckets. The first is what we call prudential reasons. These are the practical, strategic arguments. The second is moral reasons, the argument that sharing power is valuable just because it's the right thing to do.
So the prudential reason is all about getting good outcomes. Sharing power is just a smart strategy. It dramatically reduces the chance of conflict, which, of course, leads to political stability, And, this is the big one, it prevents the tyranny of the majority, which, as Sri Lanka's story shows us, can end up completely destroying the unity of a nation.
But then there's a deeper, more philosophical reason, and this quote just captures it perfectly. Power sharing is the very spirit of democracy.
And this gets to the absolute heart of the matter. Democracy isn't just about the majority ruling. A government is only truly legitimate when it shares power with everyone who's affected by its policies. People have a right to be consulted on how they're governed. It gives all citizens a real stake in the system, which makes it fundamentally stronger and a whole lot fairer.
But, and this is a really big but, that does not mean power sharing is simple or some kind of one-time fix. To see just how delicate it can be, let's look at one final, powerful story that illustrates these ongoing challenges.
This is the story of Khalil, who lives in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. Now, just like Belgium and Sri Lanka, Lebanon is a country made up of many different communities. And after its own horrible civil war, it created a very complex power-sharing agreement to try and keep the peace. And here's what that pact looks like. The top jobs in the government are permanently assigned to specific religious communities. The president has to be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim, and so on down the line. This very rigid system was designed specifically to end the war.
But Khalil feels trapped by this system. It denies him a choice. He can't aspire to the top job simply because of his background. And he raises this absolutely critical question. This pact was based on population numbers from decades ago, but populations change. Today, Muslims are the clear majority in Lebanon. So what's the fair solution now? How do you adapt a power-sharing deal over time without reigniting all those old conflicts? And that right there is the puzzle that never truly goes away.
Thank you for watching with us. See you next time.